Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone, your host for the Cosmos Society Online Open House Series. We're honored today to welcome our guests Diane Cline and Eleni Hasaki. By way of brief introduction, I will say that Diane is an ancient Greek historian and associate professor of history at George Washington University. She's won teaching awards, Fulbrights for her research, and is a pioneer in digital humanities, as we will see today very clearly, particularly in the area of social network analysis. And Eleni is associate professor at the School of Anthropology and the Department of Religious Studies and Classics at the University of Arizona, and is the director of the Laboratory for Traditional Technology. And Eleni has won funding for her research from such institutions as the Archaeological Institute of America, the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, the Samuel Crest Foundation, the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the U.S. National Gallery. Diane, Eleni, thank you for spending some of your valuable time with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this session with all of you.
Thank you. All right, Eleni, I think you're going to start, and we have some slides whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Would you like the first one now, or?
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay. I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm speaking to you from sunny Tucson. It's about 9 o'clock over here, and this session gives the opportunity to me and Diane to go over one of the most exciting projects we had together recently at the Center for Hellenic Studies. We keep working on it, although our fellowship has officially ended at the Center for Hellenic Studies, but it is just the beginning of a wonderful ongoing collaboration. So the title for our talk today, it's the Social Networks of the Athenian Potters Project. I'm sorry. So I say next, please. And it is a matching made in heaven with Diane. We come from different backgrounds, but it was all combined effortlessly. My background is in ceramic technology and pyrotechnologies, and Diane has started her career with reading and studying the treasure lists from the Parthenon, where every year the officials will write down what is kept in these famous buildings. Over the years, though, we converged, and we are both interested in innovation and in industrial quarters and how they all contribute to the creativity and the well-being and the progress of a society, ancient Greece. So the center welcomed us in a beautiful point where both our interests we were ready to talk to each other and understand and move forward. And for that, I am grateful. The next one, please. My background is firmly rooted in ceramic technology in the world of Greek potters. You may have heard some of it also in the talk that was circulated to you prior to our meetings. My early and ongoing research is on ceramic kilns, both their ancient representations, their archaeological remains, but also we had the opportunity to build a replica of an ancient Greek kiln here in Tucson at a local high school, and I'm very pleased for that, and to test some theories. And more recently, I was able to put online all the known examples of ceramic kilns in ancient Greece, covering 5 millennia, offering the opportunity to a wide range of scholars to conduct fast research so that when they come up with the kiln, when they excavate the kiln, they can publish it right away. So, you know, the good goes around. And then the most recent, my most recent research is on the wheel of the ancient potters. We are even less fortunate to have archaeological examples of wheels, but we made another replica and we tested what it takes to operate well a potter's wheel. And remember that potter's wheel apprenticeship, will come back to it. You have to be patient. Oh, the next one, I keep pressing next. The next. It is hard not to be interested in ceramics. So they give us a window into the ancient Greek world. Scholars, both those that study text, but those who study material culture as well, have turned to the vases as a window into the ancient Greek world, whether it is for the Homeric texts or any other literary sources, for daily life, for issues of women, class status and identity, and for athletics. The last one is a beautiful prize for the Panathinaik Festival. So everybody learns about them. The museums are full with great examples, mostly all the other museums, but the Greek ones. We'll come back to it. The next one, please. But it took a while for the Greek vases that are so central to our understanding of ancient Greek society to actually be considered Greek. So the first rediscovery of ancient Greek vases was when William Hamilton, the British ambassador to Naples, excavated tombs in southern Italy near Naples and found intact vases. That's why a lot of the European museums who have these vases, they are so well preserved, they come from undisturbed contexts. He had to convince the British Museum to actually acquire them because it was a new type of art. So they had actually to even correlate it or compare it with Renaissance painting to make it more palatable, more approachable. No one had seen in 1750 a Greek vase. So it came up to the light again. So in order to increase interest, they couldn't do, you know, a Google Hangout session or a chat. So Hamilton commissioned engravings of those paintings on the vases. But the engravings were very much modified with shadows, with things that were not in the original. Anyway, they achieved their goal, and the British Museum did purchase Hamilton's Greek vase collection. And then it took a little bit even longer for them to be considered Greek because, as I said, they were excavated in Italian soil. So at the beginning, they were even considered for several generations Etruscan vases. So something that we consider so central to a culture was not even associated with that culture to start with. Next one, please. I'm putting a slide up just to bring everybody on the same page of what it takes to make a pot, to appreciate the skill of both the potter and the painter. And those 10 steps, more or less, let's say 8 of them, the majority of them, are the same for whatever ceramic culture you encounter. Whether it is Italian maiolica, Chinese porcelain, you know, if you bring potters together from around the world, trust me, they will know what to do without even speaking the same language. So first you have to find good clay, and this is a secret too, so you protect it. It's a competitive edge. You have to manipulate it. You cannot use it just as it comes from them. In the raw form, you subtract things, you add things, then you form the vessel, and there are several techniques for that. Wheel is one of them, but not the only one. You let it dry a little bit, just half an hour, an hour. Then you trim the excess clay, and then you let it dry for a longer time. About a couple of days for small items, up to 2 weeks for storage vessels. And you cannot cut corners. You really have to let it dry. You will pay for it later. At that point, you also start putting the decoration on with a slip that is similar to the clay. You start the firing about 2 days total, from preheating to actual firing, to let it cool down. You cannot do too many things once the kiln is going, so it's another one of these stages that are very important. And then you unload it, and for very rare cases, you add some more painting, some more colors, especially for one group of Greek vases, the Greek lithoid, the Athenian white ground lithoid. Can I have the next one, please? I'm giving you just, I'll cover just a black figure for time's sake. The painter will not see what we see as viewers when he puts the pot into the kiln. So he will see a figure that is covered with darker orange slip. Some other colors will be visible, but he really has to extrapolate to imagine how the final result will be. This will happen in one firing inside the kiln that goes through 3 different stages with manipulation of oxygen. And I can explain that later. I even have an extra slide if we need it. But one thing for you to remember next time you go to a museum is that the potter or the vase painter will not see anything black before he puts it in the kiln. So a lot of training to imagine, 5 steps down the line. Next one, please. Once the Greek vases were established as Greek vases, somebody had to put them in an order. The good thing about vases is that they are indestructible as fragments, so they are found everywhere, and for us they serve as a dating anchor. So Beazley, through painstaking analysis of their anatomical details, was able to actually put them all in an order, identify hands, but also put them in a chronological order. And there was a general push in that period from 1880 to 1910, where Beazley, out of Oxford in England, gave that push to really identify the painters with the goal to also order them. So he did that beautifully. Diane will speak later about his major works, but we focused on what he did on the black figure vases and the red figure vases. Next one, please. He had to identify almost 1,000 hands because not many artists left their signatures. And unlike modern customs, they wouldn't put it under the vase, under the foot of the vase, but they will put it very nicely, discreetly, not a huge Times Square advertising, on the pot. And actually, you have to look for it to see where it is. Some will say, I decorated the vase, and now you can see why they take such pride. And others will say, I formed the vase. A few will take credit for both. They were perfect at everything. The black figure technique that you see here was invented in Corinth in the 730s, but ceramic centers around the world picked it up, including Athens. And then Athens, 2 centuries later, developed their own innovative technique, the red figure, which is almost a reversal. Next one, please. This is the work that Beazley did at Oxford from 1910s to 1950s. Then he wrote it up in these big volumes. He went to several museums in person. Sometimes they wouldn't even let him draw things in front of the vase, so he had to memorize the scene and go outside and make these wonderful drawings. His drawings and his notebooks and everything else he did are now online thanks to the Beazley Archive pottery database. And so we see the painstaking work he did following a methodology that is very common for Renaissance painters. It focuses on facial characteristics, hands, even ankles. And because of these 10, 12 points, he was able to identify, as I said, over 1,000 artists. Very sharp eye. Next one, please. He never said how he did it. He held that close to his heart. And no one has been able to contest what he did. He did it perfectly. It would have been great if he had told us how he did all this. And so a little bit after his death, 1970, there was a major reaction why he didn't say how he did things. So although his work dominated classical archaeology for most of the 20th century, and I was almost ready to go to Oxford to do one more vase painter in his method. At the same time, in the 80s and 90s, people wanted more methodological accuracy and also not focusing on only one aspect of classical antiquity. I loved the quote, it's one of his, when I said that the Greek vases had to be compared with another established cultural group like the Renaissance painting. He's a Florentine to my sea, and it's a great quote by Beazley. Next one, please. And as I mentioned, he did a fantastic, his contribution cannot be overstated, even with the criticism on the methodology. Scholars around the Mediterranean are so happy when they find a small fragment of Athenian pot, hopefully with the face preserved, because they can date it within 20, 10, or even 5 years. No scientific method can do that unless you have dendrochronology. So we are getting a little bit proud of ourselves about this great connoisseurship technique that Beazley established. And for that, it is an indispensable tool. And you can see a graph of the artists in their chronological order. Next one, please. Other people moved away from the stylistic analysis of Beazley and started looking more closely at how these workshops were staffed and what was the scale of production. And these are ongoing discussions. We get a lot of information from ethnographic evidence and from the capacity of Greek kilns. So these are small family-based workshops, 4 to 6 people working full-time all year long. It's not that they do, 10 different things. This is a specialized craft. And they were able to reach the Mediterranean because there were many of them, not because they were few on an industrial scale. So a lot of us are working on this issue of scale of industry and scale of production with some interesting results and trying really to rein in the evidence that we have. Next one, please. Beasley, in addition to artists, also paid attention to shapes, something that is not often mentioned in scholarship, and our work with Diane has really put it on the forefront, so that both potter and painter had to be specialized. I show you some examples of the major shapes, their heights, their available surface for decoration. Of course, if you ask any modern or ancient potter, they would say, well, we can pot everything, we can make everything, but they specialize. And once you specialize in a shape, you order or you go and collect specific amounts of clay, you let them dry for a specific amount of time, and you stack them in a specific way in the kiln, and you have your own trade networks for that shape. So you establish a name for that shape. The same with a painter. It doesn't mean that they didn't deviate, but they had a major shape to work on. Next one, please. And this is where our convergence and our expansion of the current scholarship comes with Diane, where people saw gaps, gray areas. We saw potential. We saw a social dimension of the vocabulary he used. I repeat, he didn't define it, but to us it was inspiring that he was thinking in terms of social networks, Ezekias and his companions, Lidos and his circle. So we got inspired from that, and we hit the ground running. Next one, please. And we wanted our research to shift away or to enhance. We do not discredit other research that focuses on individual painters. This is extremely valid. It's a valuable skill. We just want to look at potters' communities just as they were in ancient Greece. I'm giving you an example to the right of how the industrial quarter was in Athens, where sculptors and bronzesmiths and potters saw each other, had a coffee, exchanged a couple perhaps of technical knowledge. They had a network. They were not in a little gallery thinking big ideas. So we want to bring that out in the research as well. And I think my next slide and last, So we took the vases as a window into their world, a world of interconnectedness, where people can be innovators, they can make their mark, but they can make it within a community of practice. We are thrilled that we can we can stand of shoulders of giants that have worked on this topic, and we can contribute one little additional thing. Thank you very much.
Sarah, if we could pull up my set, that would be helpful. I'm going to take these off because I'm hearing an echo, I think. So let's see. I will start with a very brief introduction for how I got interested in social network analysis, and I have to go way up into my history. When I was 16, I had the good fortune to travel with my father about 6 weeks through Europe, and we started in Greece. And in our visit to Athens in those days, you could actually just walk into the Erechtheum, walk into the Parthenon, and I sat on the steps of the Erechtheum and wrote a postcard to my mom saying, I want to devote my life to, the study of the Greeks. Well, what was it that really captured me? And it's their creativity and innovation. It's the things they invented. Of course, as classicists, we're all aware of these innovations and inventions and discoveries, but there's something really lasting that's impacted the humanities for 2,500 years. So what is their secret sauce? How did they do it? What is their secret? Can we bottle that and use it in today's world? And that's been sort of a driver of at least one stream of my research. So around 2010, actually a lot earlier, but by 2010, I got my hands on some software. But earlier, I, of course, as an epigrapher, knew that we have thousands and thousands of names from ancient Greece. And I had become aware of network diagrams and got really fascinated with data visualization generally. In philology, we tend to write in words and describe things verbally in a linear way. And so we'll show you in a moment John Beasley's large volumes that are written exactly in this way. They're catalogs. And yet it's impossible in a linear way to see the connections, and especially in vase painters, where we have over 1,000 individuals making, that we know of, or entities, shall we say, workshops perhaps, making black figure vases in a small area of Athens in the Kerameikos. Surely they knew each other. So social network analysis is used in a variety of places. The first place that I saw it that appeared in Time magazine 1 week after 9/11. And it was made from open source newspaper accounts of how the hijackers knew each other, where they went to school together, where they lived together, where they took flight lessons together. And a organizational development consultant named Valdis Krebs made this diagram, and it was a catalyst for at least the Department of Defense to be able to begin to use it in their work, and law enforcement uses it to track gangs, and health officials use it to track disease and the spread of disease and the origins of disease and so on. So there are 120 maybe different fields that use social network analysis. The first conference I went to was in 2004 on social networks, and it's the International Network for Social Network Analysis. I've continued to present there a few times on my social networks of Alexander the Great, my social network of Socrates. I started with Pericles, and again, I'm looking for clusters within the network and individuals who are important not because of their influence, and in our case, in terms of their style of inventing something, but the people who carry that news, that information across the network, those people who are important because of their position in the network, not because of their stature or personality or techniques. So let's go to the next slide, please, Sarah. And this is, again, another couple of images of Eleni and I at work at the Center for Hellenic Studies. And I want to first start with a little bit about how we gathered our data. What is the basis for these amazing charts? And then talk about briefly, a finding or two. So to begin with, the next slide. We have a sample of Beasley's books. The Attic Red Figure was published in 1942. It eventually has 3 volumes. And the Attic Black Figure is 1956, and it has 851 pages, and that is what became our database for the potters and painters. Next slide, please. And curiously, even though Beasley was a very visual person, as you saw from his magnificent drawings, sometimes done from memory, he did not have any images or plates in any of these books. Instead, he would give the inventory number of the museum and assume that you can make your way to the Louvre to go see it. But in the meantime, what we noticed is that they didn't even have chapters or a table of contents, these books. And so as we developed these ties, I'll show you what that means, but the direct relationships between painters and potters, or painters and the people who are derivative of them, like the manner of, near to type of people, or the shape that they all had in common, we developed a kind of table of contents based on clusters who have a lot in common. So I'll show you now how we did that. But first, I want to just repeat, if we could have next slide, Sarah, the importance of signatures and the difference between having a signature and attribution, which is where you take either the inventory number or the place where the vase, the type vase sits, or some key feature of the painter, long nose painter, elbows out painter, red line painter, those sorts of things. That's attribution through connoisseurship. So here we have again Sofilos Egggrafsson. So Sofilos is one of our earliest painters who autographed basically his pot, and it appears next to that column in a temple, ostensibly, with Peleus. You can see his name in vertical retrograde going down next to him. It's as if Sofilos is a character in his field, in his exhibit of myth here. So Egggrafsson, of course, to grapho, to write, to draw, to hold a stylus, to make letters. Okay, next slide. Another example of a signed vase. Here we have a potter named Nicosthenes, and if we can now get the next slide, you'll see in more detail. Next slide, sorry. There, his signature on that same vase. These vases are almost like the replica of shapes you'd find in metal, with those sort of sharp edges, the carinated shapes. They were an innovation, and they were almost like a brand name. They're very distinctive. They're like Chanel with the two C's back to back. You cannot, mistake it for anything else. So here we see Nicosthenes Epoiason, made. And so this has been a subject of debate. Does that mean made as in making on a potter's wheel as a potter? Or is it more the manufacturer, the owner of the kiln, the owner of the workshop? What does epoiason mean? And the same thing can be said for marble inscriptions on the Athenian Acropolis or anywhere else. This epoiason is such a broad term. But here we will use it as a potter. And that's what we do in black figure vase painting by Beasley. What is interesting is the choice of where his name appears on his vase. If we could just go back one slide to see the whole, Sarah. Up one. Okay, so it's on the belly, and it's a frieze of animals, and you have sort of lion-like flanking animals around this bovine creature. Let's go forward again to the detail. And what the artist has done is used the traditional, sort of black figure technique. You can see a black body with those incisions made with a very sharp tool, like a dental instrument, scratching after it has dried and been, fired and is ready. You then scratch into it. You can see some added red towards the neck, but you can see also added white, and it's for the, sort of forefront of the belly. It's for the tip of the genitalia, and it's for the piss in the middle, which is quite remarkable. He's trying to draw attention to his sort of, creativity, I suppose. Let's go to the next one. Nicosthenes is we think maybe more like a workshop. It's very prolific. We have lots and lots of examples that have been found all over the Mediterranean world and now are in exhibits and museums all over the world. So Nicosthenes is one of the figures who has a lot of ties to other painters and potters. So here in the middle, you can see Nicosthenes potter, and in the background, some other sort of ancillary figures that aren't aren't directly tied to Nicosthenes. In this one, if there's a red line, that means he is connected to others, and they're sort of off screen because this is a detail. But the arrow shows you a relationship, a direct relationship between Nicosthenes Potter and Lidos, the painter. And that is a nickname, Holidos. It might mean something like the guy from Lydia, that he might have gone by, but he does sign his works in this way. And what we're, of course, interested in is discovering collaboration between artisans. And I'll show you in more detail a little bit in a future slide. So let's go forward, please. Just a sample of Beazley. This is through Google Books, where they'll show you just the snippets where a painter, where a phrase appears in a book. So page 443 of the Black Figure volume, we see in Bologna a pot that's by the Red Line painter, and I'm going to do a little demo of the Red Line painter now. Another pot in London called Near the Red Line painter. Strasbourg and Philadelphia also have examples. Then you have to skip 150 pages to find another reference to the Red Line painter. The Calpides, a certain shape, are of the same class, which is a way Beazley organized shapes or sub-shapes of shapes by the Red Line painter himself, and two others belong to the class in these other places. I just want to pause and say how remarkable that Beazley could find in disparate museums examples that he thought belonged together. But unfortunately, in linear form in a book, these have to be separated in time. And then finally on page 608, when he's discussing the painter of the Rhodes Pelicky, a Pelicky is kind of a bottle of sorts, and he says this is near the Red Line painter and therefore inserted here. Next slide, please. So we'll focus in sort of near the top is the Red Line painter in black letters. What we have are, shapes in blue squares. We have individual potters or painters or artists in circles, open circles if they're by attribution, and dark circles if they have a name from their own signatures. And then we have groups of potters, according to Beazley's categories, people who are of a workshop or belong together for a reason, like in yellow diamonds, the Liagros group that you can see there. So here we have at the top, Red Line painter. To the right of him is a line connecting him to the manner of the Red Line painter, which we just saw in the text. And to the left is Near the Red Line painter. And then the Rhodes Pelicky, if you look at the Red Line painter and there's a line north kind of going off screen at 11 o'clock, that would have connected to the Rhodes Pelicky. So do you see that what we're looking through in the text are pairs of entities, names or groups or classes of pots, shapes that bind these individuals together. So the studies, as Eleni explained, are mainly organized, modern scholarship is mainly organized around a specific artisan. Now, in the case of Lidos, let's say, then of course Nicosthenes would be brought into that because we have both signatures on one pot. But primarily they are interested in trying to understand more and more the unique identifiers of this potter and his career from his earliest works to his latest works, whereas we're trying to use those solid foundations of the studies of individual artists and connect them and see how ideas might have flowed through the network. So let's go to the next slide, please. Our first prototype was based on a kind of collection of these pairs that was already done. In 2004, Robin Osborne experimented with data visualization to try to understand the workshops and the relationships between potters. So on the left is a wire diagram, and these have been used in archaeology and in art history for a very long time. I studied one by Virginia Grace from 1935, looking at Rhodian stamped amphora handles. So this isn't necessarily innovative, but what it does show in a way that Beasley's book in linear fashion cannot are the various collaborations, in this case, in early red figure. So to translate that, what I do is I take a spreadsheet and I have 2 columns and I go step by step through the chart in this case, but through the text in our case, looking for relationships. So at the very top, I know it's very small to see, but in Osborne's diagram, you can see first another painter who I left out, and then Nicosthenes painter with a line drawn to the right, to the furthest right column, to Nicosthenes potter. The next one you can see is group of Louvre F125, also to the Nicosthenes potter. Thank you. And then the next one down, akin to group E, which is named after Ezekias, and it goes across to Endocades potter. But Endocades potter is also, it has little lines going down to Psiax and down to Helinos and Psiax across, because he's trying to show who worked with whom, right? But as you go down, let's go to the left column, the Hyskilos potter, the first one on the left column. You can see pretty clearly 4 arrows basically going to the middle column. But then from, let's see, from the bottom 4th one, there are 2 vertical lines that go all the way down. You follow them down, that's exactly down there all the way, and then going out to the left again. So it's not easy to see. The point generally is given very well. It comes across well that people are working with each other. So I just translated basically all of those lines, looking for the connections. And if we go to the next slide, please. Good. This is what I get. Okay. So what we have then is a visualization of the 2 columns, And what we have in the middle, if you can go to the next slide, is a chain that has 32 entities in it from left to right that connect, that are contemporaries, right? So this is a community. And within this, what I've done is I've coded potters and painters, right? So the blue nodes are potters and the red nodes are painters. So if you look at Altos in the middle or Epictetus, you can see that they're more important nodes because they collaborate with so many potters. It's kind of interesting here. Why would you change potters if you're happy with the one you have? It's like changing a doctor. Like, why would you change doctors? So we wonder about these things, these relationships, these, that might be strong in one moment of your life and fade in another, and they move to other circles, basically. So we can see some major figures, if you're familiar with, the best of the Greek vase painters that you would get in an art history class. You see from the left, the Endocades potter, the Epictetus, Nicosthenes potter, Altos, Euphronios. These are major, major figures who are the backbone of a pretty strong community. If we could go to the next slide. So here we see, for example, a potter who works with a painter, red, Duris, one of the more famous ones, who works with 4 potters. And in the right-hand side, let's see, we see a potter who works with 4 painters. So this was a proof of concept, as we like to say. We have about 80 entities in here with lots of ties, very interesting. And we thought, okay, now instead of using a wire diagram, let's really try to do it the way Osborne did it, from text. So next slide. We did a little bit of it before we got to the Center for Hellenic Studies, but the main research phase was about the first 9 weeks of our collaboration at the center. We went through all of Beasley's black figure vase painting again, sort of more thoroughly. And we end up with signed individuals, 82 of them you can see at the bottom, and 326 individual painters or potters who are given attributions like the red line painter. We have 169 groups, that is clusters of craftsmen that he didn't sort of break down inside into potters and painters, and 127 different vase shapes. And as Eleni said, you know, as we went through this, we began to feel more and more that shapes were the key to passing information through, like who made the first olpe as a shape and who decided that they would make more of them in their own workshops. I also began to feel that the kiln openings were a major event. Did it work or not? It was exciting. I think the community would come around. And as these amazing vases by people like Ezekias or Duras came out, they'd be like, oh my gosh, look how he did those handles. I'm going to try that. And so we talk about it in social network terms as contagion. This notion that someone starts something and it catches on. In modern social media terms, which is not social networks, social medias travel on social networks, right? But in social media terms, we'd say it goes viral. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. And here I wanted just to show you the sort of pathways that we like to study. We're still sort of in the beginning of this phase, but I hope you can see that it's blinking a bit. It's moving through pathways from Lidos to the Nikosthenes Potters Workshop. Also, we're showing passages from Nearchos and Amasis and Ezekias, and these are sometimes indirect, that is, they're not one degree of separation, but 2 degrees of separation, and sometimes through shape. That is, both are doing a trefoil oinakoi, you know, that has a very particular shape, contemporary. So they must either know each other or know of each other's work to make that same shape at the same time. They're not going to innovate and make it up independently. So that's how shape is important. Let's go to the next slide. Above, you can see the relationships with the labels, that is, with the names of every node on them, and below, without. And for data visualization, without is much clearer to see. You can see who the important ones are, the sort of central figures, the peripheral figures, but you can also see sort of in the wider areas where there might just be 1 or 2 nodes. Those are the really important ones that connect the major hubs. Let's go to the next slide. So this was a real challenge for us to try to figure out how to convey who's who, but with such a crowded field. So social network analysis, as I say, it emphasizes the position of each node in the network and tries to help us identify who is important here. And there are many different centrality metrics that I won't go into, but that we are publishing, and hopefully we'll be able to share those publications with you soon. So degree centrality is the easiest to understand, and it's a way of like reorganizing our list of people into the top 10 or the top 20, as you can see highlighted on the left, who have the most ties. So LMC and DC is our shorthand for little master cups and droop cups, which if I had to write it out under the node would be a nightmare, right? It's just too much, so we had to use some shorthand. 61 different entities are tied to that shape. Some are subshapes, but most are potters and painters. So shape unifies because it's a very particular kind of shape with very similar fields of decoration that are personalized, shall we say, by different artisans. So 61 ties to that one shape. And next is another shape, the Amphorae and Hydrae painters, and Oinakoi, and Panaprise and Cap. And Leagros group are the first group or cluster of artists rather than shapes that have the most ties. Number 8, basically, on the left. So 25 different entities, different nodes hook into the Leagros group. And it's only at number 12 in the top 10 because the first 2 fields are taken off. Nearchos, who's a potter, a very important potter, if you're familiar with vase painting, with 21 ties. And then 2 down is Lidos. And then the Antimenes painter, I'm sort of scanning down to look for painters, and actually Nicosthenes should have been up there, no? I don't know. At any rate, this is these 10 are lit up, and if you look on the right, you can see red lines with a major hub. Now we can do the same for several other centrality measures. So betweenness centrality is one I won't explain now, but in some, it identifies the people who serve as links or bridges between these guys, right? So they don't necessarily have a lot of ties, but they're tied in very important ways to get you from one to the next. And then there are other kinds of degrees of centrality measures as well. Next slide, please. We did, in the last 3 weeks, experiment with red figure, with the other Beasley volume from earlier from 1942, red figure vase painting. And what we're very interested in is how it hooks into the end of black figure. And that's really our next main focus. What we've done here is to just look at chapters 1 through 8 of a very long series of 2 volumes plus an addendum. And we have 104 nodes, mainly people in this case, not so much shapes, and 162 ties between them. And again, I've used some coding. So solid black means that we have their signature. The first one's sort of 1/3 of the way through towards the bottom. You can see Altos is a pretty big circle, a named individual that we saw in Robin Osborne's sample. The open circles are attributions, and then squares are shapes. So towards the left, palmette eye cups, a very specific kind of shape, and you can see some attributions, right? Schuer-Lear painter and Winchester painter, and then to the right of it is a class within that broader shape, the Antimachos class, which if you go upwards leads to the Nicosthenes painter, and in an open circle, and the Pampheos potter in black. And this is sort of the pathways that we're interested in, not the individual nodes, which are subjects of monographs, but the ties between them. Next slide. Thanks, Sarah. So when we overlay our little red figure example over the black figure example, you look here for the red circles, and those are the ARV. And you can see they're sprinkled mostly across the right side. That is, they're connected to the later potters. We move from the earliest black figure on the left to the later. It's a little over 100-year period that we'd like to slice down. We'd like to narrow so that we're looking at people who are just contemporaries. And so part of our next project as we're going into red is to chop out some of the earlier black and be able to really focus on those interconnections. Next slide. Another interesting question is context. So we're using Beasley, and as you saw, you know, there's a pot in London, there's a pot in Boston, there's a pot in Rome, you know, and so what about pots that are found in one place? So we started with the Athenian agora, and the ones that you see in red are those that at least sherds of theirs have been identified in the agora excavations in Athens. So the black ones are absent and are mainly exports. We were surprised somewhat to find that some of the red ones that we think of as mainly export businesses actually were locally used as well and end up in the fill and in the wells in Athens. Next slide. So innovation, we come back around our interest in innovation. In the business school literature in about 1960, this curve was produced that shows how, you know, someone makes an innovation like the trefoil oinakoi, the three-lipped, sort of curvy lipped oil vessel, and it catches on. But early, the innovators might just be 2.5%. Maybe a family or two decide they're going to try it, and then there are the early adopters, and they're not necessarily in the neighborhood physically of the Keramicus, but they might share the kiln. They might have seen each other's work. They might have seen it down at the dock when they're transporting their goods for sailing off. So they decide to start making it, and it either kind of dies at that point or it catches on. So then you have the early majority, and it doesn't take all that long. And this is something that advertisers, in New York have figured out since Mad Men, that if you can get it to catch on, it will stay a while. And so then the late majority might adopt it. And this, it's often technology that we're talking about for this. So the first people to have iWatches or iPhones, not so many bought it. And then by the next year, everyone's getting it for Christmas. So it can go very rapidly. And then there are finally the sort of old-fashioned potters that we're interested in as well. So these we want to identify. We think we can see clusters within our diagrams that this is, a goal of ours. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the software I'm using is called NodeXL. You can find it for yourself at nodexlgraphgallery.org. And there's a book that goes with it, Analyzing Social Media Networks with NodeXL. The software is designed to import or a fire hose from Facebook or Twitter to analyze for social networks. But I adapted the technology to make it work for ancient Athens and Athenian potters. So with that, next slide, Eleni and I are going to entertain your comments and questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Next slide, please. Let's go to the,
There we go. Full circle.
Full circle. Put these back on.
All right, I am going to let the people be seen now. Wow, any questions, I guess? Maria has one. Go ahead. Oh, you're okay.
I have unmuted myself. So thank you very much, Eleni and Diane. This is one amazing reading of the importance of these artworks, these vases in social network. You provided so much context, and I really want to thank you and congratulate you for all this groundbreaking work.
Thank you.
One thing that I would like to ask you, because I'm also interested in communities and social networking. Apart from the networking between artists that you so wonderfully mapped out, I was wondering, could we in a way also extrapolate or map out even the client's relations? I mean, the people who ordered these vessels, whether they are luxury vessels or they are just simple vessels for everyday life. Because I'm really interested in your opinion on that.
Eleni, you take it.
I can start the discussion on it. Well, the beautiful vases that you see, the answer is no. Let's start from the short answer. But the people who bought the vases in Italy and included them in their graves, definitely come from an upper status stratum of the society. They loved Greek vases, Athenian vases. Eratosthenes even made catered to them, and even made in Athens shapes that were inspired by Etruscan prototypes. So, I mean, we are talking about clientele manipulation to the max, and then sold them there. Sometimes even the inscriptions have Greek letters, but they are what we call nonsense inscriptions, so they don't make anything. So it's an interesting, dichotomy, because they are elite, but then the potters, either because of their own literacy or because it didn't really matter that much, they don't make literate vases as well. So that's one thing. So we know that affluent groups in Italy liked Greek pots, Athenian pots, I should say, enough to maintain a very vigorous export market. For that is the broad picture. If we want to increase our resolution and go to the individual, then we have to look for a pot that has both the name of the dedicant, Diane, dedicated, and a signature of a potter. And those exist, but they are not many.
Could we estimate the percentage of these vases that are not many, which bear this kind of indicator?
I don't want, in a live discussion, but I would say you cannot make an argument. They are so little that they are that you cannot make an argument, because even if you have a name like it's like the cards by American Express, John Smith. You have to know something about that person too. So you have one link, but sometimes they say where his deme is, his region. But the answer is we do not have quantity that will allow to draw patterns other than Athenian decorated pottery was highly esteemed both locally and abroad. And I belong to a camp, so this is a choice, but I am very strong in that camp, that decorated pottery was not as important or as expensive or such a status marker as it is in private collections today or in museums, but it was something that you would like to have. And of course, people who could, some households, this is the best they could afford, and some aristocratic households, they could have some beautiful vases by Exekias and tons of other metal, bronze and silver vessels. So it's not a comparison for me. It's a diversity of what you can afford and the style that you can appreciate.
So also in terms of social life of the wider community, to what extent do you think pottery and all the concomitant work or all the work that has been done around it, the people who painted it, the painter, the potters, all the community that in a way framed the art of pottery, to what extent do you think it contributed to the overall social life of the community, apart from being, of course, an important part of work labor or workforce?
Oh, you're muted, Eleni.
But it's a beautiful question. because as we said, there is a little bit of scholarly debate. Do the bronze smiths or the metal smiths give inspiration to the potters by their shapes, by their carinated profiles, the big handles? And the truth is there is communication. I was in Tunisia, and right in front of me in a pottery workshop comes somebody with a metallic Aladdin's lamp, and he says, "Can you make me a copy of that metallic Aladdin's lamp?" And they made it. So, but to me, the ceramic industry, because it can produce items that can be purchased by everyone, not everything by everyone, but something for everyone. I believe they have a bigger impact. Their work enters all households. It goes to all the graves in the cemeteries. It goes to all the sanctuaries. So the metalware is of great status. There are dedications. They will stand out in a sanctuary, and they would say, it's like a great car. They say, "Oh, great." But it's the ceramic industry, I would say, that would really move a population.
So if we are allowed to make an acronym, you would say that pottery belongs more to the pop culture of classical antiquity and some of later antiquity than, for example, metalwork. Are we allowed to say that?
I'd like to answer that. I would agree with you and some evidence for that might be the Kalos inscriptions. Are you all familiar with those? Okay, so occasionally there'll be a little inscription at the top of the vase or off on the side that says so-and-so is kalos, is good looking. And that is bound by time. That's like a moment when that's, in that person's youth, and it relates to a specific time in society when people might have thought one person was particularly good looking. But you never would find that in a metal vase, in a silver or gold vase. Those are more timeless. So yes, there may be fads even that we see. Do you agree, Eleni? It looks like you're
I do. The Kalos, it's a great example that contemporary handsome youths were celebrated. Were celebrated. And something else that people tend to forget, most metalware cannot carry seams. So the material is very valuable, the size, the technique, but they don't have these large surfaces to tell a story.
True. Yeah. Thank you very much. That was really fascinating.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
And Keith, are you muted so you can't help us? Oh, you can. Okay.
I just unmuted myself so that I can help. Georgia, to ask a question.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the lots of work that we suppose you've had and you will have in the future. It's an amazing contribution. Grateful. Actually, because you mentioned Robin Osbert, who actually happened to publish 2018, The Transformation of Athens. He claims that there was actually the so-called Greek Revolution within this century of between 6th and 5th century, and you could, with his reasons and his very fine argumentation, that you could see a change in depicting things. It was not a change so much as a change of lifestyle, but a change of viewing things. So do you think that by underlining the true fact of having social networks, very tight social networks, not always as tight, but intertwined between them, there was such a thing as a bigger or a social network at large of Athenian potters.
Yeah.
Do you think that undermines his thesis as well, in the sense that there is a kind of a certain general perspective which is shared, and which you can pin down more or less, let's say, because actually from my, let's say, modest perception, there is no artist which really stands out in the sense of saying something so much different than the others. So in this sense of being able to represent something collectively, I think the social networks can only drive to this direction. I would be very interested to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Wow, interesting. So I'm not sure. I think there's something called tradition and technological tradition that is handed down. And I've, said, well, why didn't at least a couple of potters, make the
It seems we may have lost the connection with Diane. I don't hear or see. Well, Eleni, perhaps while Diane is reestablishing, would you like to take a stab at that?
Let me see if I can read Diane's mind. I think Diane was starting to say that tradition and innovation do not have to be opposites or not present at the same time. And so I hope I understood the question well. So by us highlighting the connections, we still leave space for the innovators to contribute and to, as I said, to make their mark, but not in a vacuum. Because I would like one of the things we discussed in our research is that there is a period between 525 to 500 where many innovations take place in pottery decoration, but only one sticks, the red figure technique. And we have some interesting theories why that. Why from the amphora quarters and not from the little mass, from the cup industry that had all the other techniques? So actually, we do not reject earlier opinions, we just amplify them. Is that what you asked, Georgia?
Yes or no? I guess I really find Osborne's contribution worth many thoughts and many consideration. And there is actually a very inspiring attitude behind that, naming that, the Athenians were at this time sharing kind of a collective point of view, collective perspective as artists. And this is not only, and this is something shared not only by from the artists, but from the clients. So it was kind of a so-called city image shared by, at large, shared by the masses, and then shared or exported to the world, and so on. Let's put it the other way around. The existence of social networks,
yes,
as tight and strong as it can be, does not necessarily speak against such a let's say, shared perspective. It's not. On the contrary, it could be used as a let's say, as a basis to understand or to suppose, suggest, or not to, let's say, counterfeit the existence of something as the so-called, if not cultural revolution, the so-called shared life image of Athens at the time. This is what I was.
I do, and we definitely have been inspired by Robin's work. Sometimes, now that you mentioned the transformation, I need to reread it, because sometimes we go back and reread some earlier scholarship, and some of this is wonderful, and some of this makes us think even further, like we found by Diffrey Williams from 1991 looking at Greek vases about the red figure technique, one invention by one person at one moment. And so it is a catchy little phrase, but I think with our work, we took a deeper breath and we thought, well, is this how we want the red figure revolution or transformation? Diane keeps telling me she has lost connection, so bad connection at the office, at the place where she is. I would like to go back and reread his work. His diagram was really a catalyst for us. So I can easily say he's by far ahead of us in many aspects of conceptualizing the field. I will leave it at that. I think we can address both innovation and cultural and shared tradition and how an innovation catches on. And we do not have the answers to everything because, for every one of these little dots, there are people who have spent 30 years. So we cannot condense, 500 years worth of scholarship combined into one diagram. But we hope that someone like Osborne, and we would like to reach out to him sooner than later, would also find new ways to see things, like he provided with us with his wire diagram.
I see that Diane has rejoined us. Can you hear, or Diane, or can you? We can't hear you, I guess, or see you.
She texts me.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Join group. She's trying. I can see them.
Well, I hope that she'll have better luck in a minute. In the meantime, any other questions? Ian, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor, for the presentation. Very interesting. Just curious if the export market was only for highly decorated vases, or whether there was an export market for more, less decorated pots. So, for example, if you found Greek-style pots in Etruria that were not figuratively decorated, would they be exported from Greece, or would they be copied by Etruscan potters to resemble Greek pots?
Thank you for this question. The vast majority of exported Athenian pots are decorated. And I don't mean extensively. Sometimes, like we mentioned the beautiful kylikes, where the shape is very important, but even that one has a little decoration or a signature, and then inside there is a beautiful central tondo, a central circular area. So they will not send out cooking pots or lamps or roof tiles or terracotta pipes, which is another very important sector of the ceramic industry. So Greek Athenian potters, the ones we mapped and people see in museums and people study, is only a small section of another larger industry that addresses local needs. So those were rarely exported, especially far away. About the imitation, this is a great question, because cultures across the millennia have been imitating Greek pots. From the Mycenaean times, they had a stirrup jar for oil, aromatic oil. People in Egypt copied both the shape and the decoration. The one way you can see the difference is the clay. So they wouldn't import the clay, they would use their own clay. People in Etruria, they did copies of Corinthian style perfume holders, and there is a theme here with perfume. So the Corinthianizing aribaloi and so forth. So there are some local attempts to imitate, but they are very obvious both in technique, in the clay used, and also in the order of things, because sometimes they will put like a little decoration that doesn't ever show up on an aribalos, whereas no one would have done it in Corinth or in Athens because it was part of their cultural syntax, as we call it in decoration studies. So, and even later on in Roman times, Italian terra sigillata will be coming out of Italy, but local centers were making their imitations. And there is a great article, if anyone is interested, it has been quite inspiring for me, The Blind Potter, where you get, I can send it to Keith and he can distribute it to the group, where it's for Italian terra sigillata, where someone, what is the difference from someone apprenticing with someone in another culture versus someone like, in northern Germany, receiving an Italian finished pot and trying to recreate it.
Yes. I'm curious because you mentioned Arabalos. My father acquired an Arabalos in Etruria long time ago, and it's not decorated figuratively, but it is decorated. So so it's sort of midway between a fancy, Athenian days and a cooking pot. It's that and a kylix. So it would be for someone who was not, part of the senatorial class or whatever the Etruscan, version of that, but someone maybe middle class. Would that be exported or made in an imitation in Etruria?
With the Corinthian ones, they are also earlier, and it's part of their style. So you may have perhaps ones that only has some bends around, or only one little frieze of running animals, or you can have some that have what does fish have? Scales, the scale pattern. The scale pattern. So that's a particular style for Corinth at that period, and it still takes a lot of time. I mean, even something so simple in such a small pot, it's labor intensive in terms of decoration. So whether it is the earlier Corinthian cosmetic wares or the later Athenian larger vessels, they will have an extra layer of labor of decoration in order to make it. And there is a big argument about it from the late 80s. Was Greek pottery a ballast? Was it worth enough to export it, to make money for everyone involved? And I'm happy to share some articles on that. So by the time it reaches the Italian clients, everybody in between has made some money a little bit out of this trade.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else? I've let our time go a little long so that we could have some more questions, but.
I would like to thank tremendously Keith and his team because they really coordinated with us so well across different locales, but we wanted it to be a combined presentation, and I'm sorry that Diane, because it is our joint fellowship at the center and our ongoing collaboration has informed each other so well, and we thank Keith for not breaking us up.
No, of course. I only wish the arrangements could have been a little bit more secure so that we wouldn't have lost Diane. But thank you. Please pass along our thanks to Diane as well. And thanks to you all for joining us. Until next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.